Greetings, dear subscribers and casual listeners of my channel. Ron Weasley is a character who is often underestimated. For many viewers, he remains forever the sidekick, the guy who either eats, makes funny faces, or panics about spiders. Next to charismatic Harry and brilliant Hermione, Ron could indeed look like the odd one out, a weak link thrown in only for comic relief. No wonder people still argue that Ron was never worthy of Hermione. But if you look at the books instead of just the films, the picture changes dramatically. Ron is a layered, brave, and surprisingly wise character. Without him, the story of Harry Potter would be completely different. Let's take a look at the real Ron Weasley, the one viewers were almost never shown. Number 1. A true Gryffindor. The Gryffindor house is famous for bravery. Ron didn't end up there by accident. But in the films we see very few examples of his courage. The troll fight, the chess match in Philosopher's Stone, and the Room of Requirement battle. That's about it. The rest of the time, if you trust the movies, he's either scared or joking. In the books, it's a very different story. Ron repeatedly shows bravery. In Prisoner of Azkaban, for example, he doesn't just shout, "Run!" He actually pushes Harry aside and takes the hit himself from the monstrous dog. The dog lunged again. Ron, with all his strength, shoved Harry aside and the great jaws closed on his outstretched arm. Or another moment. Even wounded, Ron drags himself to his feet and stands in front of Harry, shielding him from Sirius Black. "If you want to kill Harry, you'll have to kill us too." In the movie, this scene was simply handed to Hermione. And it's changes like these that made viewers think Ron was a coward. In reality, he's one of the bravest characters in the entire series. Number 2, the caring, good-hearted friend. Ron has a knack for sensing others. When Hermione or Harry feel lost, he often becomes their anchor. Remember the scene with a crying Hagrid. "I'll make some tea," Ron said calmly. And that simple act brought the giant back to himself. He spends time appealing for Buckbeak, gives Dobby sweaters and socks, and cares about others more than himself. During the Yule Ball preparations in Goblet of Fire, when Ron struggles to find a date, he suggests Ginny should go with Harry instead of with him. He's willing to take the teasing just to make sure his friend doesn't feel humiliated. That's the act of a true friend, though the films rarely show him in that light. Number 3, one of them. Unlike Harry and Hermione, Ron grew up in a wizarding family. He knows the magical world inside and out, and in the books he was meant to be the guide for both the readers and his friends. He explains the meaning of mudblood, talks about giants, even explains Parseltongue. But in the films, many of his lines were handed to Hermione, turning her into an even bigger know-it-all and Ron into a background extra. "Did you know Hagrid's half-giant?" Ron asked. "Come on, I'll explain in the castle." While at the same time, Ron inherits some wizarding prejudices. He fears saying Voldemort's name. He distrusts werewolves and giants. These flaws make his character more alive, with real weaknesses and fears. Number 4, emotional range. Ron is the most emotional of the trio. He doesn't bottle things up. When Snape calls Hermione an insufferable know-it-all, Ron is the one who defends her. He yells, argues, fights, and that makes him real, not a cardboard cutout. During Hermione's torture at Malfoy Manor, his voice breaks as he shouts, "Hermione! Hermione!" He screamed again and again, straining to reach her. In the movie, Ron just sits in silence, frozen, but it's his emotions that show how deeply he loves his friends. And yes, Ron doesn't hold back. He insults Snape, flips Fred a rude gesture, and in that he's probably closer to an ordinary teenager than anyone else in the books. Number 5, quarrelsome Weasley. Yes, Ron fights a lot with Hermione over Crookshanks, with Harry over the Triwizard Tournament, even with Ginny. But in the books, these conflicts are far deeper than what we see on screen. He's emotional, hot-tempered, jealous of Harry, ashamed of his poverty, but then he always finds the strength to forgive and to stand by his friends. That's not weakness, that's genuine humanity. "You're not doing this alone anymore. I'll help you, Hermione," he says about Buckbeak's case. Could someone like that really be a coward or a useless sidekick? Number 6. Key moments. Rupert Grint played Ron brilliantly, and that's a fact. His facial expressions became iconic. But the problem wasn't the actor, it was the script. The films kept only the jokes, stripping away the depth. In the books, Ron is more than comic relief. He's a guide into the magical world, a true Gryffindor, a loyal friend, and a deeply emotional teenager who makes mistakes and grows. That's why book fans will never call him the third wheel. Number 7. Strategist and tactician. Ron's greatest moment of strategy comes with the giant chessboard in Philosopher's Stone. The film shows the spectacle, but the book gives the depth. Ron is not just playing, he is commanding. He studies the board, weighs the risks, and positions his friends like pieces in a larger plan. "You'll have to make some sacrifices," he says, with the calm authority of someone far older than 11. And then he makes the ultimate move, stepping into danger himself so Harry and Hermione can move forward. It is not luck. It is calculated bravery. That scene proves that Ron is more than a sidekick. He is a strategist who sees beyond fear. Rowling makes it clear when he interrupts Harry's protest. "Of course it's got to be me. That's what I'm here for." In that one choice, Ron shows tactical intelligence and the willingness to risk his life for the mission. The films reduce him to comic relief, but the books remind us that he was, from the very beginning, a leader who could outthink the board and outplay the odds. Number 8. A leader, not a shadow. Ron was never just a follower. In the books, he steps into the role of leader when Harry falters and Hermione hesitates. In Order of the Phoenix, when Harry is crushed by the Ministry's smear campaign, it is Ron who stays steady. He tells him bluntly, "We're with you whatever happens." It is not flashy, but it is leadership, the kind that keeps people moving when everything feels hopeless. The films cut most of this, leaving Ron as little more than comic relief. A clearer moment comes in Goblet of Fire. After reconciling with Harry, Ron becomes his anchor during the Triwizard Tournament. He does not have the answers Hermione has, but he restores Harry's courage when it matters most. Rowling shows Ron's voice as the grounding presence that lifts Harry out of fear. Without him, the trio would fracture. The movies stripped him of these moments, but in the books, Ron proves again and again that he is the quiet leader who holds the others together. Number 9. Son of his family. Ron's place in the Weasley family shapes everything about him. Surrounded by older brothers who all shine in their own way, he grows up convinced he has nothing unique to offer. Bill is the clever and charismatic curse-breaker. Charlie is strong and adventurous, loved by dragons and people alike. Percy is the perfect student, polished and ambitious. Fred and George are adored for their wit and daring. Even Ginny, the youngest, becomes the bright star of the family. And Ron, he feels invisible, the one always walking in the shadow of someone else's success. This sense of being sixth in line fuels his insecurities and explains so much of his jealousy toward Harry and Hermione. When Ron explodes in Deathly Hallows, shouting, "You don't know how it feels. You're always the favorite, always the chosen one. How do you think anyone else feels?" It is not just about Harry. It is about a lifetime of measuring himself against the impossible standard of his own brothers. The films show Ron as moody or sulky, but the books reveal the deeper truth. He is a boy who loves his family but aches under the weight of comparison. And yet, this pressure is also what drives his growth. Ron's journey is not about being the cleverest, or the bravest, or the most famous. It is about realizing that he does not need to compete with Bill or Charlie or even Harry. He learns to be enough as himself, loyal, funny, compassionate, and brave in ways that matter. His confession, "All my life I've been overshadowed, and I'm just Ron," is not defeat. It is the first step toward becoming more than a shadow, toward carving out his own place in the world. Number 10, the shadow of jealousy. Ron's jealousy is not childish pouting in the books. It is the weight of living in someone else's shadow. He grows up surrounded by brilliant brothers, each of them praised for something he lacks. Then comes Harry, the boy who lived, famous before he even steps into Hogwarts. Ron wants to be loyal, but envy gnaws at him. In Goblet of Fire, when Harry's name comes out of the goblet, Ron's reaction is not just anger, it is pain. Rowling writes, "You could have told me. You could have told me you'd put your name in. I thought we were supposed to be friends." That line carries the bitterness of someone who feels invisible, even to his best friend. The film reduces this moment to sulks and glares, but in the book, Ron's jealousy is raw and believable. He admires Harry, but cannot escape the fear that he will always be second best. When he finally admits he was wrong, it is not casual. He comes back to Harry ashamed, knowing he let envy twist his loyalty. That act of recognition, the choice to repair the friendship, makes him stronger than before. He is not a flawless hero. He is a boy learning how to grow past his insecurities. His jealousy of Hermione follows a similar path. The Victor Crumb episode cuts deeper than the film ever shows. Ron is furious not because Hermione betrayed him, but because she proved she could be desired by someone else, someone older and world-famous. His clumsy anger, "Oh, you're fraternizing with the enemy," is the shout of a boy realizing his feelings too late. When he matures enough to apologize and treat her with respect, the growth feels earned. This journey from envy to acceptance is what gives Ron depth. He is not a flat sidekick, nor a comic relief character. His flaws, his jealousy, his temper, make him real. More importantly, they allow him to change. That is why his story is powerful in the books. It reminds us that true friendship and love do not exist without struggle, and Ron Weasley never stopped fighting his way toward both. Number 11, romantic and loyal husband. Ron's love story with Hermione is not clumsy or accidental in the books. It is a slow-burning thread woven through every year they spend together. From the moment he awkwardly notices her teeth shrinking after Madame Pomfrey's spell, to the way he stiffens whenever Victor Crumb's name comes up, the tension grows naturally. Ron is not smooth, but his feelings are real. His jealousy of Crumb during the Yule Ball is not just teenage sulking. It is the pain of someone who realizes too late that the girl he cares about has been seen by others before him. Rowling does not let Ron off easily. He hurts Hermione with careless jokes and then burns with shame when he sees the hurt in her eyes. In Half-Blood Prince, when Hermione is upset after seeing Ron with Lavender Brown, it is clear that both of them are caught in a storm of unspoken words. Ron tries to laugh it off, but behind his grin is guilt. Hermione's anger, her sharp words, are not simply about Lavender. They are about years of waiting for Ron to finally see her the way she deserves. And then comes the war. In Deathly Hallows, at the darkest moment, when the trio is covered in blood and dirt, when everything could be lost, Ron finally acts. As they rush through the Chamber of Secrets to destroy a Horcrux, Hermione casts a spell, and Ron blurts out about freeing the house elves. Hermione stares at him, stunned, and then Rowling writes, and then before Ron knew what was happening, she flung herself at him and kissed him full on the mouth. It is not comedy. It is the release of years of love, fear, jealousy, and devotion, sealed in the heat of battle. The films shrank this into a gag, a sudden kiss that made audiences chuckle. But the books gave Ron a different arc, a boy who doubted himself, who stumbled, who spoke too late and regretted too much, finally finding the courage to love openly. He did not just win Hermione's heart, he proved he could be more than just Ron, a husband, a partner, a father. That story, as tender and human as any in Harry Potter, is almost invisible on screen. Number 12. Humor as a weapon. Ron's humor is more than comic relief. In the books, it is his shield, the way he keeps fear at bay when the world around him is falling apart. He cracks a joke not because he is careless, but because he senses that his friends need to breathe. The films stripped this down to silly faces and awkward lines, but the novels show something deeper. A boy who uses laughter to fight despair. Take Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire. Harry is terrified before the first task, convinced he will not survive against the dragon. Everyone is tense, and silence hangs heavy. Then Ron leans over and says with a smirk, "Well, if you die, Harry, you can always leave me a firebolt." Harry bursts out laughing. The fear doesn't vanish, but it loosens its grip. That moment of laughter gives him strength to walk into the arena. This is not a throwaway joke. It is Ron understanding exactly what his best friend needs. His humor is sharp, often sarcastic, and sometimes biting, but it always lands when the pressure is highest. In Prisoner of Azkaban, when Hagrid sobs over Buckbeak's trial, Ron calmly suggests tea. Mum always does that when someone's upset. It sounds simple, but it cuts through the storm of emotions in the room. Even Harry and Hermione look at him in surprise, because Ron's instinct to lighten the mood works better than logic or speeches. He knows how to heal with laughter. On screen, this side of him fades. His humor is flattened into clownish antics, as if his only role is to stumble or panic. The books tell a different story. They show a friend who can make you laugh when you most want to cry, who can remind you of hope with a single, sarcastic comment. Ron's jokes are not weakness. They are courage in disguise. Number 13, the dark side. Ron Weasley is not a perfect hero, and J.K. Rowling never intended him to be one. In the books, he is jealous, insecure, and quick to anger, but these flaws make him human. Unlike Harry, who carries the weight of destiny, or Hermione, who hides behind logic, Ron wrestles with ordinary emotions. That is why his dark side feels so real. When he lashes out, it is not because he is weak, but because he is overwhelmed by fear of being forgotten, of being just Ron. Nowhere is this clearer than in Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, when the Horcrux locket poisons his mind. The cursed object magnifies his worst doubts. He sees visions of Harry and Hermione together, hears voices telling him he is useless. The book describes it with brutal honesty. Ron was staring into the locket. His face was pallid. Beads of sweat were breaking out on his forehead. "Did you hear it?" he whispered. "Did you hear what it was saying to me?" This is not a boy sulking. This is a teenager breaking under unbearable pressure. When Ron finally leaves, it feels like betrayal. Harry shouts at him, Hermione pleads, but he cannot stay. It is not just anger driving him out the door, it is despair. Rowling writes, "Oh, you think I don't know how this looks, coming back here after I walked out on you? What am I? A complete git, that's what." This moment is painful, because Ron is not the comic relief here. He is a young man drowning in his own insecurities, unable to silence the voice that says he will never be good enough. The film softened this. On screen, Ron storms off like a sulky teenager who did not get his way. His struggle is reduced to a spat, his pain turned into petty jealousy. The raw honesty of the books, Ron's fear of irrelevance, his desperate need for belonging, vanishes, and with it, one of the most powerful arcs in the entire series, the reminder that courage is not the absence of weakness, but the ability to face it, even when it tears you apart. Number 14, Hero in the Shadows. Ron Weasley is perhaps the most misunderstood of the central trio, not because J.K. Rowling failed to write him with depth, but because the films stripped away his most heroic qualities and replaced them with comic relief. In the books, he is the steady heartbeat of Harry's journey, a boy raised in poverty who nevertheless carries himself with loyalty, courage, and instinctive wisdom. When one looks carefully, Ron is not simply the sidekick, he is a hero who repeatedly saves lives and shapes outcomes. The tragedy lies in how the films reduced his contributions to a handful of jokes and awkward stumbles, leaving the impression that he was the weakest of the three, when in fact the opposite is true. One of the most striking differences lies in the scene with the chess game in Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. In the book, Ron steps into the role of a strategist and protector, volunteering to take the most dangerous position in the enchanted match. He tells Harry and Hermione, "That's chess, you've got to make some sacrifices," and rides into battle knowing full well he could be crushed. His courage and tactical thinking allow Harry to proceed to the final chamber. The film includes the moment but underplays its gravity, almost rushing through the sequence as if it were just another obstacle. The sheer bravery of a young boy deliberately putting himself in harm's way is diminished, and with it, the understanding that Ron was willing to bleed for the cause even in his first year. The rescue from the spiders in Chamber of Secrets is another case where Ron's presence becomes crucial. Readers remember his terrified reactions to Aragog's brood, but what is often overlooked is that Ron, even in panic, manages to steer the enchanted car back to safety. He is not merely screaming in fear, he is acting under pressure, remembering the path through the forest, and saving both Harry and himself from being devoured. The line, "Follow the spiders, why couldn't it be follow the butterflies?" shows his humour in the face of danger, but beneath that humour lies real resolve. The film portrays him as little more than a frightened passenger, while the book gives credit to his instinctive actions that ensured their survival. In Prisoner of Azkaban, Ron's loyalty reaches a peak when he stands up to Sirius Black, whom he believes to be a murderous traitor. Even with a broken leg, Ron positions himself between Harry and the supposed killer. He tells Sirius, "If you want to kill Harry, you'll have to kill us too." Those words are not only a declaration of bravery, but a reminder that Ron's instinct is to protect his friends at any cost. The film places more emphasis on Hermione's bravery in the same sequence, but in the book Ron is the one immobilized with pain and still defiant. It is the kind of bravery that is quiet and easy to overlook, yet it is perhaps the most telling moment of his character. The Triwizard Tournament in Goblet of Fire is remembered for Harry's challenges, but Ron plays a subtler role that the films barely acknowledged. His falling out with Harry, painful as it is, demonstrates that Ron is not just a follower, but a boy with his own insecurities and pride. When they reconcile, Ron becomes one of Harry's loudest supporters, cheering him on from the stands and analysing strategies. More importantly, when Harry returns from the graveyard with Cedric Diggory's body, Ron is the one who immediately tries to reach him, furious with anyone who doubts Harry's story. This protective loyalty is essential, showing Ron as more than comic relief. He is Harry's moral anchor, even when Harry falters. Order of the Phoenix provides one of Ron's greatest triumphs, yet the films almost erase it. As keeper of the Gryffindor Quidditch team, he is mocked relentlessly, plagued by self-doubt, and burdened with the weight of his brothers' reputations. But in the book's climax, Ron defies the jeers and leads the team to victory. The crowd chants his name, "Weasley is our king," a taunt turned into triumph. This is a defining moment of growth, a boy once riddled with insecurity proving his worth to himself and to others. The film, however, reduced his Quidditch arc, robbing him of one of his most inspirational victories. In the battle within the Department of Mysteries, Ron again displays his courage. Though struck by the brains in the Hall of Mysteries and left in a confused state, his willingness to follow Harry into danger is never questioned. His readiness to fight alongside older and more experienced students like Tonks and Lupin shows that Ron's bravery is not situational. It is instinctive. The film instead portrays him in a weakened, almost laughable state, dancing in a daze from the spell, erasing the grit of his actions. By the time Half-Blood Prince arrives, Ron has matured into a capable duelist and loyal protector. During the attack on Hogwarts, he fights fiercely at Harry's side. Earlier, when poisoned by the mead intended for Dumbledore, his brush with death reveals how deeply loved he is within the circle of friends. Hermione's grief and Harry's desperation highlight that Ron is not expendable. His survival matters deeply. The films keep the poisoning scene but flatten his contributions as a fighter, again pushing him into the background where his deeds should have shone. Number 15. Protector of the family. Ron Weasley in the books is not simply the comic relief or the insecure sidekick that the films often presented. He is, at his core, the embodiment of loyalty born from deep love for his family. His every action, from his impulsive bursts of anger to his steadfast loyalty to Harry and Hermione, can be traced back to the lessons he absorbed at the Burrow, surrounded by the warmth, chaos, and protection of the Weasley household. J.K. Rowling carefully painted Ron as someone who may doubt himself but never doubts the worth of his family, and in doing so she gave him a moral compass rooted in kinship. This is why when we see Ron rise to the defense of others, it is not accidental. It is the result of a character who views love and loyalty as sacred truths. Unfortunately, the films stripped away much of this essence, leaving audiences with a flattened version of Ron, more comedic than courageous, more insecure than devoted. One of the most powerful examples of Ron's protective instincts in the books comes in Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets. When Ginny disappears into the chamber, the book emphasizes how Ron is prepared to hurl himself into danger. The text notes his determination and his readiness to act, even though he is terrified. Rowling writes, "If you die down there, you're welcome to share my toilet," said moaning Myrtle cheerfully. Ron ignored her and looked at Harry. His hands were shaking, but he was already reaching for his wand. In this moment, he does not hesitate because Ginny is his sister, and her life is worth far more than his fear. The film, however, reduces Ron's role, pushing him to the sidelines with the excuse of a collapsed tunnel, leaving Harry to act alone. By diminishing his bravery, the movie loses an essential truth about Ron, his instinct to stand as a shield between his family and danger. The defense of family is not just limited to life-threatening crises. Ron's fiery temper when his family is insulted is one of the most consistent aspects of his character in the books. In Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, during the incident on the Hogwarts Express, Draco Malfoy sneers at the Weasleys' lack of wealth, Ron reacts instantly, ready to fight, wand out, furious that anyone would mock the people he loves most. The text captures his fury. Ron's ears went red. He had heard these insults before, but the mention of his mother seemed to ignite him. "Say another word about my family, Malfoy, and you'll regret it." This instinctive defense is not about pride in himself, but about protecting the honor of his parents and siblings. The films, however, gloss over these moments, often portraying Ron's temper as childish bickering rather than righteous indignation born from devotion. The significance of family to Ron becomes even clearer when we consider how he views Harry and Hermione. They are not just friends to him, they become extensions of his family circle. In Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, when Harry is unfairly attacked by the press and ridiculed by students, Ron's anger at those who insult Harry mirrors his reaction when his family is targeted. Later, when Hermione is mocked in Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets with the slur Mudblood, it is Ron who explodes, attempting to curse Draco despite his broken wand. Rowling writes, "Ron pulled out his broken wand, muttering furiously under his breath. Sparks flew, and he was knocked backwards." This scene shows that for Ron, defending Hermione's dignity was instinctive, no different from defending Ginny's life. In the films, this moment is reduced, stripped of the raw passion that defines Ron's loyalty. Rowling never lets us forget that Ron's courage is not born of bravado, but of love. In Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, his anguish over the safety of his family during the war is overwhelming. His decision to leave Harry and Hermione for a time is not cowardice, as the movies subtly suggest, but a reflection of his torn heart. He fears for the lives of his parents, for Bill and Fleur's safety, and most of all for Ginny, left at Hogwarts under Snape and the Carrows. His protective instincts are tearing him apart. Rowling describes his torment. He was worried sick. About his family, terrified that they might be the next ones to be attacked, he could not stop imagining them captured or killed. This reveals the emotional depth behind his actions, depth largely overlooked by the films, which prefer to cast his departure as a spat of jealousy. The Weasley family dynamic is crucial to understanding Ron's character. Being the sixth son in a family of 7 children, Ron constantly struggles with feelings of inadequacy. Yet this does not manifest as resentment toward his siblings. Instead, he admires them, argues with them, and still defends them. In Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, when Rita Skeeter publishes lies about Harry and Hermione, she also ridicules the Weasley family's financial struggles. Ron is enraged, feeling the insult cut deep into the dignity of his home. For Ron, family is not something to be ashamed of, but something sacred, and he responds with rage whenever outsiders try to tarnish that image. The films miss this entirely, often using Ron's background as a joke, rather than showing the pride and protectiveness he feels toward his loved ones. Number 16, becoming an adult. Ron Weasley's portrayal in the Harry Potter films often left him trapped in the role of comic relief, the nervous, slightly bumbling friend whose appetite seemed to define him as much as his loyalty. Yet J.K. Rowling's books crafted a far deeper, more complex journey, one that depicted Ron's gradual transformation from an insecure boy overshadowed by his family and friends into a man capable of courage, sacrifice, and emotional maturity. The contrast between these two interpretations is stark, and understanding it requires us to step back into the pages where Ron truly grew. From the very beginning in Philosopher's Stone, Ron is not merely a sidekick. He is the boy who teaches Harry the rules of the wizarding world, who sacrifices himself on the chessboard with the words, "That's chess, You've got to make some sacrifices. His act of bravery at only 11 years old foreshadows the kind of man he would become. Yet the films flatten this moment, treating it as a quirky plot device rather than the first major decision Ron makes to risk his life for others. Already, the subtle shaping of his character arc is softened, reducing the depth of his courage into a scene played for spectacle rather than transformation. As the series continues, Ron's flaws are just as essential as his strengths. Rowling wrote him as deeply human, jealous, insecure, sometimes petty, yet always capable of growth. In Goblet of Fire, when Harry's name emerges from the goblet, Ron's sense of betrayal burns with intensity. He sulks, accuses Harry of dishonesty, and withdraws into hurt pride. The films present this conflict quickly, almost as a childish quarrel, but in the book it becomes a pivotal lesson for Ron. When he finally realizes Harry never wanted this fame, he humbles himself and admits his mistake. Rowling writes, "He looked ashamed of himself." "I suppose I did," Ron muttered. That moment shows a boy learning to recognize his flaws and step beyond them, a key piece of the maturing process that the films skim over. The insecurity that gnaws at Ron is not arbitrary. He is the sixth of 7 children, the youngest son in a family where his older brothers excel in every field. Bill, the scholar, Charlie, the dragon tamer, Percy, the prefect, Fred, and George, the brilliant entrepreneurs. Against that backdrop, Ron struggles to define himself. The mirror of Erised seen in Philosopher's Stone reveals his deepest wish, not wealth, not adventure, but standing as Quidditch captain and head boy, finally outshining his brothers. This yearning shows his vulnerability, and it is a crucial element of his arc. The films leave this vision aside, erasing an intimate piece of Ron's character, and in doing so they weaken the audience's ability to understand the roots of his self-doubt. One of Ron's greatest demonstrations of growth comes during Half-Blood Prince. For the first time, he must step out from under Harry's shadow on the Quidditch pitch. Rowling carefully crafts the tension of Ron's insecurities, his fear of failing in front of the entire school, his reliance on Felix Felicis that turns out to be nothing more than a placebo, yet when he performs brilliantly saving the team, it marks a turning point. He is not only Harry's friend, but a skilled player in his own right. The films reduce this triumph into a brief montage, missing the layered meaning that Ron's courage had to extend beyond facing monsters and extend into believing in himself. The climax of Ron's transformation occurs in Deathly Hallows. In the books, the pressure of the hunt for Horcruxes drives him to his breaking point. His departure from Harry and Hermione, consumed by paranoia and resentment, is painful and shameful. Yet this low point is essential. He chooses to return, not because anyone forces him, but because his conscience demands it. When he rescues Harry from drowning in the icy pool, dragging him and the sword of Gryffindor to safety, the moment becomes symbolic. Ron is no longer the boy who doubted his worth. He is the man who literally saves his best friend's life. Rowling describes it vividly. Ron's face was a mixture of fear and determination. It is a rebirth, a reclaiming of his role not as sidekick, but as equal partner in their quest. The films render this arc with far less gravity. Ron's departure feels rushed, his return more like convenience than redemption. The harrowing weight of his decision to leave and the greater weight of his decision to come back never receives the emotional space it deserves. In the book, the silence between him and Harry after the rescue is heavy, meaningful, filled with unspoken forgiveness. In the film, the nuance is lost and the audience never sees how much Ron's return signifies his maturity. Equally important is Ron's ability to admit his mistakes and grow emotionally. In Order of the Phoenix, his position as prefect surprises even himself. He admits to Harry, "Me, a prefect? Never." Yet the role forces him into responsibility, into the realization that leadership is not about glory but about discipline and example. The films almost ignore this development, treating Ron's prefect badge as a passing detail. Yet in the books it contributes to his arc of self-realization. He is not merely tagging along, but actively stepping into responsibility, even if awkwardly. Number 17. Wizard on equal footing. In the Harry Potter films, Ron Weasley often comes across as little more than comic relief, the boy who fumbles with his wand or shouts in panic, while others carry the burden of action. Yet in J.K. Rowling's books, the Ron who breathes on the page is a very different figure. He is not flawless, nor is he a prodigy, but he is competent, resourceful, and brave. More importantly, he is a wizard who consistently demonstrates that he belongs beside Harry and Hermione, not behind them. The screen version, by minimizing his successes and magnifying his failures, distorts a character who was meant to be a full participant in the trio's adventures. From the very beginning, Ron's magical ability is presented in the novels as perfectly solid. When he helps Harry navigate the challenges protecting the Philosopher's Stone, it is Ron who demonstrates mastery of wizard chess, a magical skill requiring not just intelligence but quick calculation and courage. His sacrifice in that game is not accidental comedy, but a decisive and heroic use of a wizard's tool. The film shows the chess scene, of course, but even there, his role is framed more as a lucky move than as the display of magical instinct and bravery Rowling described. In the book, the moment reads, "There's no other way. You're the best at chess, Ron. You go on." His magical chess strategy proves that magic is not just about wand work. It is about understanding, instinct, and action. As the series progresses, Ron's spells are shown in the books to be effective, even when he doubts himself. In Chamber of Secrets, during the battle in the Forbidden Forest, it is Ron's attempt at spellcasting that signals his willingness to stand firm against acromantulas despite being terrified. Though his broken wand betrays him comically, the issue is not his incompetence but the faulty wand itself. Rowling makes it clear that a broken wand spluttered and backfired, causing disasters no skilled wizard could avoid. In the films, however, Ron is presented as the punchline without the critical context. The image sticks with the viewer, a boy who cannot get a single spell right, rather than a capable wizard hampered by bad luck. One of the most striking distortions lies in Prisoner of Azkaban. In the book, when Sirius Black breaks into the Gryffindor dormitory, Ron, barely awake, throws himself at Sirius to protect Harry. He shouts, "If you want to kill Harry, you'll have to kill us too." This is not the act of a bumbling sidekick. It is raw, fearless loyalty, backed by action. While magic is not directly used in that moment, Ron's courage in standing against a fully grown wizard speaks to the essence of his character. The film version minimizes the impact of this confrontation, reducing it to background noise, while centering the drama on Harry and Hermione. By Goblet of Fire, Ron's magical competence has grown in the novels, though his insecurities often cloud his confidence. During the Triwizard Tournament's second task, he is chosen as the most important person in Harry's life, placed beneath the lake as the prize. This is not a matter of spellcasting, but a symbolic recognition of Ron's role as Harry's equal. Rowling emphasizes this in her narrative, showing that Harry's success is tied not just to his bravery, but to his bond with Ron. In the film, however, Ron is depicted more as comic jealousy incarnate, sulking over Harry's fame, without balancing that insecurity with his genuine importance to the story's magical fabric. The Order of the Phoenix is where Ron's magical abilities shine most brightly. in the books. During the battle in the Department of Mysteries, Rowling gives Ron the same stage as Harry and Hermione. He hurls spells against Death Eaters, dodges curses, and reacts with quick reflexes. Even under the influence of a spell that makes him delirious, he continues to fight, proving his instincts are rooted deeply in magical ability. A line from the book captures it. Ron was giggling weakly, still trying to aim his wand at the Death Eater. The humor of the moment does not erase the fact that he is fighting a fully grown dark wizard. The films, however, transform Ron into dead weight, focusing the battle sequences on Harry, Hermione, Neville, and Luna, leaving Ron in the shadows of incompetence. In Half-Blood Prince, Ron's magical development is even more apparent. His performance in Quidditch shows discipline and courage, qualities tied to his wizarding identity. More importantly, in the book's scenes of dueling, Ron is never portrayed as lagging behind. In one instance, during Slughorn's party, when Draco Malfoy nearly provokes a confrontation, Ron is ready with his wand, just as Harry is. Rowling writes of him as part of the trio's defensive shield, not the tag-along. In the film, however, his storyline is reduced to love potions and slapstick moments, undermining the capable duelist and dependable partner Rowling envisioned. The deliberate downgrading of Ron's magical skills in the films becomes particularly painful in Deathly Hallows. In the novel, during their break-in at the Ministry, Ron plays an equal part in the plan. He uses Polyjuice Potion, keeps his composure, and contributes spells when danger arises. Later, during the escape from Gringotts, he is part of the coordinated attack that allows the trio to mount the dragon. Rowling gives him full agency in these desperate magical struggles. In contrast, the film cuts or rearranges moments to leave Ron less proactive, leaning on Harry and Hermione's competence to drive the action forward. Even the climactic Battle of Hogwarts suffers from this distortion. In the book, Ron's spells are described in detail, his duels against Death Eaters given equal weight. He and Hermione together save lives and contribute directly to the downfall of Voldemort's forces. A particularly vivid moment is when Ron and Hermione destroy Hufflepuff's cup in the Chamber of Secrets, using basilisk fangs and planning their movements with precision. This is Ron's magical success, not comic relief. Rowling writes, "There was a clinking noise and Ron pulled out a pair of fangs. The pair work as magical equals, but in the film Hermione takes the decisive action while Ron simply watches." Another overlooked example comes in Deathly Hallows when Ron suggests speaking Parseltongue to open the Chamber of Secrets. It is his idea, not Hermione's, demonstrating his ability to think magically, creatively, and under pressure. This is the Ron who understands the world he inhabits, who absorbs lessons and applies them in unexpected ways. The films erase this contribution, transferring the initiative to Hermione. By doing so, they rob Ron of his unique voice in the magical narrative. The distortion is not just about spells, but about narrative balance. In the books, Rowling ensures that each member of the trio brings something essential. Harry contributes courage and instinct, Hermione brings intellect and preparation, and Ron supplies tactical thinking, loyalty, and steady magical ability. The films, in their reshaping of Ron, exaggerate his insecurities while stripping away the evidence of his magical success. The effect is subtle but powerful. Viewers leave the cinema thinking Ron is merely comic support, rather than a wizard capable of holding his own against dark forces. It is important to understand that Ron's magical ability is not about being a prodigy. Rowling never intended him to outshine Hermione in academics or Harry in daring. His role was to prove that a wizard of ordinary background and skill could still be extraordinary through courage, quick thinking, and practical application of magic. When he casts Wingardium Leviosa to help the troll, or when he shouts Expelliarmus against Death Eaters, the point is not perfection, but effectiveness. The films, by leaning heavily into failures and insecurities, failed to capture this delicate balance. Ron's growth as a wizard also mirrors his growth as a person. In Order of the Phoenix, becoming a prefect is more than a school honor. It reflects his discipline and the trust others place in his magical and moral reliability. In the novels, this honor marks Ron as capable, steady, and worthy of respect. The films downplay this entirely, glossing over the prefect storyline as though it were irrelevant. But for Rowling, it was a crucial milestone showing Ron's development as a wizard on par with his peers. Even in the quieter moments of the books, Ron's competence is woven into the narrative. He practices spells, he strategizes in moments of crisis, and he learns from mistakes. In the film adaptations, the choice to highlight his panic or failures without balancing them with his successes reshapes the audience's understanding. The Ron of the books is not the eternal sidekick fumbling with his wand. He is a young man who grows into a wizard of courage and substance, who earns his place at Harry's side through proven magical ability. The legacy of Ron Weasley, as written, is that of a wizard who embodies the truth that heroism is not about brilliance alone. It is about stepping forward, wand in hand, even when doubt lingers. The novels never strip him of his dignity, but the films too often do. In Rowling's world, Ron's magic is real, effective, and vital. The silver screen, however, gave us only fragments of that truth. Number 18, a friend who forgives. Of all the qualities that define Ronald Bilius Weasley, one stands above the rest and quietly becomes the thread that binds his role in the story together, the ability to forgive. It is not a glamorous trait, nor one that draws immediate applause from readers. Forgiveness does not sparkle like bravery or brilliance. It does not roar like ambition. Yet for Ron, it is this simple human strength that allows him to endure the storms of jealousy, fear, and self-doubt that could have destroyed the fragile bonds between him, Harry, and Hermione. In the books, Ron's forgiveness is depicted with raw, emotional clarity, making his journey an interior victory of loyalty over resentment. The films, however, reduce this quality to mere moments of mood change, stripping away the depth of his character and the triumph that comes from reconciliation. The first true test of Ron's forgiving nature arrives not with Hermione or Ginny, but with Harry himself. Harry, almost without effort, becomes the boy who lives in the light of attention. Quidditch victories, the Triwizard Tournament, even the whispered reverence of strangers in Diagon Alley, all of it sets Harry apart. For a boy like Ron, who has spent his life in the shadow of older brothers, the pain of comparison is acute. In Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, this envy explodes into a fight that leaves the two boys estranged. Yet Rowling gives Ron's forgiveness gravity, after Harry faces the dragons in the first task. Ron's return is not shallow or sudden. He realizes, as the book says, that Harry hadn't put his name in the Goblet of Fire after all. More importantly, Ron acknowledges in silence the pettiness of his own feelings. The reconciliation is a quiet act of forgiveness, without fanfare but brimming with emotion. The film adaptation trivializes this by making the argument shorter, the reunion abrupt, as if their friendship were made of elastic rather than fragile trust. With Hermione, forgiveness comes in a different shade. The dynamic between them is fiery, laced with teasing, arguments, and unspoken affections that grow throughout the series. During the Yule Ball, Ron's jealousy toward Victor Crumb is sharp and cruel, and his treatment of Hermione leaves wounds that echo well into later years. But Ron forgives, not by erasing what was said, but by continuing to choose her companionship, even when pride would prefer distance. In The Half-Blood Prince, when Ron's disastrous relationship with Lavender Brown crashes around him, Hermione's pain resurfaces. Ron, awkward and stumbling, does not demand forgiveness from her, nor does he offer eloquent apologies. Instead, he demonstrates through action, by trusting her, by standing with her, by letting her back into the intimate circle of his thoughts, that their bond is more important than the mistakes of youth. The films, again, soften this dynamic, playing their quarrels for humor more often than for the anguish that makes their reconciliation meaningful. Ron's forgiveness also extends into family life, particularly with Ginny. She is the youngest Weasley, fiery, stubborn, and unafraid to push back against her brothers. Their relationship is marked by clashes, especially when Ginny begins dating Harry. Ron's protectiveness sometimes takes the shape of judgment, and Ginny is quick to call out his hypocrisy. In the books, Ron learns to forgive not only her choices, but also his own immaturity in trying to control her. He moves from being the brother who scolds to the brother who silently supports. In the films, this subtle transformation is largely invisible. Their sibling connection is flattened into small moments, robbing viewers of one of the tender arcs that reveal Ron's growth as both a brother and a man capable of humility. The most powerful act of forgiveness, however, comes in the Deathly Hallows. This is Ron's crucible, the moment where his weaknesses, jealousy, fear, the crushing weight of feeling second best, boil over and lead him to abandon Harry and Hermione. The book spares no detail in making his departure devastating. The locket Horcrux feeds his darkest thoughts, whispering that his friends do not need him, that Hermione prefers Harry, that he is nothing but a burden. The words strike true because Ron has long feared them. And when he finally leaves, it feels like betrayal, the kind of wound that might never heal. Yet his return is not painted as a simple change of heart. Rowling shows that Ron has been wandering, tortured by regret, longing to come back even as pride gnaws at him. He tracks them down through the Deluminator, guided by something greater than reason, love and loyalty. "I wanted to come back the minute I'd left," he admits in the book. "I just didn't know how to find you." This moment is not about convenience. It is a victory over his own bitterness. It is forgiveness of himself as much as forgiveness of Harry and Hermione. The film treats this scene with a disappointing lack of weight. Ron leaves, the plot moves forward briskly, and he simply returns as though deciding to join the group again were no more significant than changing his mind about a meal. The audience sees no inner torment, no struggle, no conquering of demons. What in the book is a profound act of maturity, Ron learning that love is stronger than envy, is reduced to a narrative footnote. His character suffers for it, as though the filmmakers could not trust the audience with the subtlety of forgiveness. Forgiveness in Ron's story is not passive. It does not mean forgetting pain or pretending the wounds were never inflicted. Rather, it means choosing love over resentment, even when resentment would be easier. When Ron reconciles with Harry after the Triwizard fight, he does not suddenly stop feeling overshadowed. When he makes peace with Hermione after years of tension, he does not erase the scars of jealousy. When he returns in the Deathly Hallows, he does not magically rid himself of insecurity. Forgiveness in Ron's world is a decision, renewed again and again, to remain loyal despite the sting of old hurts. This is why it resonates so deeply in the books and why its absence in the films leaves his character feeling thinner. Consider the way Rowling frames Ron's return in the tent. He does not come back triumphant, but ashamed, desperate, almost begging for a chance to be accepted again. His vulnerability is piercing, and his relief at Harry's willingness to forgive him mirrors the very quality Ron has demonstrated all along. "I was a fool," he admits, and there is no trace of pride in the words. The power of the scene lies in the mutual forgiveness between friends, each one acknowledging the fragile humanity of the other. It is here that Ron grows beyond the shadow of his insecurities and proves himself capable of the kind of strength that no spell could conjure. The films, sadly, allow this scene to pass too quickly, stripping it of the aching humanity that makes it unforgettable on the page. What makes Ron's forgiveness remarkable is that it exists alongside his flaws, not in spite of them. He is quick-tempered, easily wounded, often jealous, and deeply insecure. These flaws make his forgiveness harder and therefore more meaningful. To forgive when one is unbothered is simple. To forgive when pride and envy rage inside is an act of strength. The books do not let us forget this. Every time Ron chooses to forgive, it is a choice against the grain of his own nature, an act of love that demands courage. By simplifying or glossing over these moments, the films deny him the heroism that comes from inner battles. Rowling also underscores this quality through the symbolism of the Deluminator. The object does not merely guide Ron back to Harry and Hermione physically, it represents the light of forgiveness drawing him out of his darkness. When Ron hears Hermione's voice coming from it, he recognizes that the bond between them cannot be destroyed by mistakes. It is one of the most beautiful metaphors in the series. The films include the Deluminator but fail to imbue it with the same thematic weight, reducing its significance to a convenient, magical gadget rather than a representation of Ron's forgiveness and loyalty. Even with his family, Ron demonstrates forgiveness in quiet ways. He forgives Fred and George for teasing him relentlessly, for making him the butt of their jokes, because he understands the love behind it. He forgives Percy after years of estrangement from the family without bitterness. Percy's betrayal of the Weasleys, his alignment with the Ministry, wounds the family deeply, yet Ron does not gloat or condemn him when Percy returns. Instead, he accepts him, as he has accepted others, with a heart that chooses unity over division. The films cut much of Percy's arc, erasing the chance to see Ron's forgiving nature shine in this context. The true tragedy of the film adaptations is not that they changed details or omitted subplots, but that they stripped Ron of his emotional victories. Viewers were left with a character too often used for comic relief, too often seen as moody without reason, too often overshadowed by Harry's heroism and Hermione's intellect. The Ron of the books is not merely the funny sidekick or the jealous friend. He is the one who forgives, who keeps the trio together not by brilliance or power, but by the quiet resilience of his loyalty. It is his forgiveness that makes the golden trio golden, and without it the story risks crumbling into rivalry and resentment. To understand Ron's place in the saga, one must look at him not as the comic foil, but as the glue of the trio. Harry is the chosen one, Hermione the brilliant strategist, but Ron is the one who forgives, who returns, who chooses loyalty even when wounded. This is the essence of his heroism. By neglecting this in the films, the adaptations deny audiences the full beauty of Ron Weasley, the friend who forgives, and in forgiving, makes the triumph of love over darkness possible. Number 19, Ron and the Darkness of Fear. Ron Weasley is often remembered by movie audiences as the comic relief of the trio, a boy stumbling into trouble with flailing arms and squeaky outbursts. Yet in J.K. Rowling's books he was crafted with more depth, a figure whose fears defined him just as strongly as his courage. His story was never about the absence of fear, but rather about the way he carried fear with him, facing it even when every instinct screamed to run. The films reduced that struggle to slapstick comedy, stripping him of the gravity that Rowling carefully gave him. Nowhere is this clearer than in the way his terror of spiders, the acromantulas, and his boggart are treated between page and screen. In Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, Ron's phobia of spiders is not just an arbitrary quirk. Rowling makes it clear that this fear is rooted in his childhood trauma when Fred once turned his teddy bear into a giant spider. That detail tells us everything about why Ron's terror is visceral, more than just a dislike of creepy crawlies. In the books, this background provides depth and gives readers a reason to connect with his panic, seeing it not as a weakness, but as the residue of something cruel and formative. Yet in the films, that scene is tossed aside, leaving audiences with little explanation, reducing his shaking and shrieking in the Forbidden Forest to a comedic gag. The difference becomes even more pronounced in the chapter where Harry and Ron follow the trail of spiders into the dark forest and encounter Aragog. Rowling writes the tension like a nightmare. The rustling grew louder. Something big was moving among the trees. And then, out of the shadows, they saw the gleaming, many-eyed face of a monstrous spider. For Ron, this was not a moment of mild discomfort. It was the full embodiment of his worst childhood fear rising before him in flesh and chitin. He trembled, unable to speak, his mind consumed by sheer horror. Yet he followed Harry into that den of nightmares, his loyalty stronger than his terror. This is the essence of Gryffindor courage, acknowledging the fear, yet pressing forward anyway. The films, however, dilute this confrontation. Ron's role in the cinematic version of the Aragog scene is reduced to screaming in the backseat of the flying car, his fear played for laughs as the Ford Anglia saves them. The depth of the moment, the courage it took simply to be there, the way he was forced to stand in the presence of his worst nightmare, is stripped of its psychological weight. Instead of a character demonstrating inner strength against fear, he becomes a background actor in his own trial, his shaking hands and pale face overshadowed by slapstick. The boggart in Prisoner of Azkaban provides another striking example. When Lupin asks students to face the boggart, it reveals Ron's greatest fear, a spider. Rowling carefully describes the scene. There was a loud crack, and a giant spider scuttled forward, its legs tapping on the floor. Ron immediately casts his spell, shouting, "Ridiculous!" and imagining the spider with roller skates. The humour of the spell is not at Ron's expense, but at the boggart's, because the books emphasize the triumph of turning a personal nightmare into something laughable. It is a moment of empowerment, a Gryffindor boy transforming vulnerability into strength. The films, however, play it as a moment of exaggerated shrieking, pushing the scene into the realm of parody rather than triumph. What is lost in these portrayals is the recognition that Ron's fears are not trivial. They stand as a symbol of the ordinary person's struggle within the extraordinary world of wizards. Harry faces Voldemort, Hermione wrestles with the fear of failure and loss of control, but Ron is the most relatable because his fears are deeply human. A boy afraid of spiders, a boy worried about being overshadowed by his brothers, a boy doubting his worth. This is the boy who still marches into the Forbidden Forest, still fights Death Eaters, still stays loyal to his friends. His courage is not about being fearless, but about acting despite his terror. That is what makes him heroic. One of the most telling quotes comes later in Prisoner of Azkaban, when Harry and Hermione try to drag Ron away from danger in the shrieking shack, but he insists on standing his ground despite his broken leg. "If you want to kill Harry, you'll have to kill us too," he says to Sirius, unaware at that moment of Sirius's innocence. This is Ron at his core, a boy who shakes, who fears, who feels inadequate, but who refuses to abandon his friends even in moments of crippling fear. The films gave that line to Hermione, stripping Ron of a defining moment that proved his bravery did not depend on being the strongest or most skilled. It is crucial to understand that Rowling never intended Ron to be fearless. In Goblet of Fire during the Triwizard Tournament, his fear of losing Harry manifests in his anger and jealousy, but it is born from insecurity rather than malice. The fear of being forgotten, of not being enough, sits beside his fear of spiders as another shadow that follows him. When he reconciles with Harry, the bond is not built on bravado but on vulnerability, the acceptance that he is scared but still willing to stand with his best friend. This subtle but powerful arc barely registers in the films, where his insecurities are overshadowed by comic interruptions and eye rolls. The truth is that Ron's fears form the foundation of his courage. In Deathly Hallows, when he returns after abandoning Harry and Hermione, his confession about hearing Hermione's voice in the locket's cruel, taunting vision shows just how much fear governs his actions. He admits his terror of being left behind, of being unwanted, of losing the girl he loves. Yet, despite these deep-seated insecurities, he destroys the locket Horcrux, screaming in defiance as the images of his fears attack him. Rowling makes this scene harrowing. Ron raised the sword of Gryffindor high, his arm shaking, and swung it down into the serpent's eye. That strike is not just against Voldemort's magic, but against the darkness of his own fear. The films minimize the emotional intensity of this moment, focusing instead on visual effects, when in truth, the horror and triumph of the scene lie in Ron's personal victory over his deepest insecurities. Ron's fears also serve as a reflection of the readers. While Harry's destiny is grand and Hermione's intellect is dazzling, Ron embodies the struggle of those who feel ordinary. He is the boy terrified of spiders, the boy with hand-me-down robes, the boy often overshadowed. Yet he walks into the Chamber of Secrets, the Ministry of Magic, and the Battle of Hogwarts. He stands trembling but unbroken. For many readers, this is the essence of courage, not the absence of fear, but the decision to act even when afraid. By reducing these moments to cheap laughs, the films betrayed the very lesson Ron was meant to embody. The erasure of Ron's depth in film adaptations also impacts the trio's dynamic. In the books, he is the balance between Harry's reckless bravery and Hermione's logical caution. His humor is not only comedic, but also a shield against fear, a way of coping with overwhelming situations. Without the context of his fears, his jokes lose their layers, becoming shallow quips instead of survival tactics. The boy who cracked jokes while spiders closed in around him was not a fool, but a fighter using humor to endure terror. This nuance is absent in the films, leaving him appearing less like a partner in heroism and more like an accessory. One can argue that this distortion of Ron's fears in the films contributes to the misconception that he is not truly a hero. Yet the books insist otherwise. When he defends Harry on the Hogwarts Express in Philosopher's Stone, when he sacrifices himself in the life-sized wizard chess game, when he insists on returning to face Voldemort despite his terror, these moments show that Ron's courage is rooted in his willingness to face fear. Rowling's Ron was a study in vulnerability, demonstrating that true bravery does not shine in the absence of fear, but glows brighter in its presence. Even the way Ron's fear is described linguistically matters. Rowling uses trembling, shaking, sweating, physical symptoms of panic that make his experience relatable. Readers feel his dread and, by extension, his triumph. Compare this to the films where his fear is punctuated by high-pitched shrieks or slapstick stumbles. The emotional connection is severed, replaced with a shallow laugh that fails to honor the gravity of the character's journey. When Ron faced Aragog, when he fought his boggart, when he struck the locket, he did not erase his fear. He carried it with him, eyes wide, body trembling, but hands steady enough to wield his wand or the sword of Gryffindor. That image, the boy who is terrified yet still fights, is the heart of his story. The film's decision to flatten this into a caricature robbed audiences of seeing one of Rowling's most powerful lessons, that fear does not make you less of a hero. Facing fear is what makes you one. Number 20, Joker. And nothing more. Ron Weasley has always been painted by J.K. Rowling with more colours than the movies allowed him to keep. On the pages of the books, he is not simply a joker, not just the friend who lightens the mood, but a boy with layers of pride, loyalty, insecurity, and courage. He uses humour as a shield, not as an identity. Yet on screen, the adaptation often stripped that shield away and left the audience with the impression of a comic relief sidekick, someone who stumbled and cracked jokes at the wrong moments, and nothing more. This distortion did more than simplify his personality. It robbed the trio of its essential balance. Consider how Ron's humour worked in the very first book, Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. When Harry nervously meets his new friend on the train, Ron distracts him from awkwardness with small jokes about the sandwiches his mother packed and his mischievous twin brothers. But what matters is not that Ron wants to be funny, it is that he senses Harry's discomfort and bridges the gap between them. Rowling describes him as a boy with a thin face, bright red hair, and freckles, whose first instinct was to reach out and make the other boy feel at ease. This is not the reflex of a fool, it is the instinct of a natural companion, someone who senses tension and knows how to diffuse it. On screen, that nuance is lost, and what remains is a bumbling child with an appetite. The shift becomes clearer in Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets. In the book, when Harry hears the voice of the basilisk in the walls, Ron is the one who grounds the situation with both seriousness and humour. His remark about hearing voices being a sign of going mad is witty, but it also conceals his own unease. He is frightened, but he masks it in sarcasm so that Harry does not feel isolated in his terror. Hearing voices no one else can hear isn't a good sign, even in the wizarding world, he says, making Harry laugh despite the danger. In the movie, this line is reduced to a quick gag. It is played for a laugh rather than layered with the insecurity and empathy that Rowling intended. Even more telling is Ron's role in Prisoner of Azkaban. In the novel, he stands trembling before Sirius Black, convinced that this notorious killer has broken into the dormitory to murder Harry. Ron's first reaction is to protect his friend, planting himself between the supposed murderer and Harry's bed. His voice shakes, but he shouts that Black will have to kill us all before touching Harry. This moment is monumental. It shows Ron's bravery, a willingness to face death despite his fear. Yet in the film, the scene is staged in a way that makes his intervention almost invisible. The camera centers on Harry, while Ron's heroism is reduced to a passing image, soon drowned in the swirl of action. For those who only watch the films, the memory of Ron as a joker overshadows moments like these. The Quidditch World Cup in Goblet of Fire is another revealing example. In the book, Ron is enchanted by Victor Crumb, almost reverent, showing how deeply he admires skill, fame, and success. This admiration is not blind hero worship. It reflects his longing to step out of the shadows of his many brothers, to prove that he too can shine. His jokes during this section about mascots and his awe at Crumb are not the jokes of a clown. They are the words of a boy trying to mask envy with humor. But in the movie adaptation, his admiration is turned into buffoonery, reducing him to a giggling fanboy, rather than a complex young man dealing with insecurity and the painful desire to be recognized. Perhaps the starkest example of distortion lies in Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince. In the novel, Ron becomes a Quidditch star after years of struggling with self-doubt. His victory is not played as comedy, it is written as a hard-won triumph. Rowling gives us a glimpse into his trembling hands, his disbelief when the crowd roars his name, and the powerful feeling of finally stepping into a spotlight of his own. Yet the film reshapes this into a near-slapstick performance, focusing on his accidental brilliance under the influence of Harry's feigned Felix Felicis. Instead of a character arc about conquering insecurity, the movie feeds the narrative of Ron as lucky, laughable, and undeserving of serious attention. Even Ron's relationship with Hermione is flattened by this approach. In the books, their quarrels are layered with genuine emotion, born from Ron's jealousy, insecurity, and unspoken affection. When he makes snide remarks about Victor Crumb during the Yule Ball, it is not because he wants to be funny, it is because he feels replaced and unseen. Rowling's writing is sharp here. "You're fraternizing with the enemy," he spits, jealousy burning behind the joke. The humor masks his pain, but in the films the moment is staged as a comical outburst, played for laughs rather than heartbreak. The audience misses the complexity, a boy struggling to express love in the only way he knows, through clumsy words. Rowling consistently shows that Ron's jokes are tools of survival. When he mocks Malfoy, calling him the amazing bouncing ferret after Moody's transfiguration, the laughter is not idle. It is Ron's way of reclaiming dignity from a bully who has always sneered at his poverty and family. These sarcastic remarks are weapons, a form of defense in a school where cruelty is constant. Yet in the films, such lines are often cut or delivered without the sharpness that reveals their purpose, leaving Ron looking like a boy who laughs at everything rather than a boy who fights through laughter. The irony is that Ron's humor in the books makes him one of the most relatable characters. Everyone knows the friend who lightens the room when tension threatens to crush it, who makes a joke not because they are careless, but because they care too much. In Order of the Phoenix, when Harry's anger consumes him, Ron is often the one to puncture the heaviness with remarks that remind the group they are still children, still human, even as they prepare for war. These moments are not comic relief, they are survival mechanisms, but the films, craving levity, sharpened these edges until Ron became defined by them, not balanced by them. The reduction of Ron also changes the dynamic of the trio. Rowling's books present Harry as the heart, Hermione as the mind, and Ron as the soul, the grounding presence that ties them together. He is the friend who sees both sides, who jokes not to diminish but to connect. When this is lost, as it is in the films, the trio loses its balance. Harry becomes the sole hero, Hermione the sole strategist, and Ron the stumbling sidekick. The magic of the three as equals fades. This distortion becomes most painful in Deathly Hallows. In the book, Ron's decision to leave the tent after wearing the locket for too long is not the tantrum of a clown. It is the eruption of years of insecurity, sharpened by dark magic. His return and his act of destroying the Horcrux is not comic, but redemptive. Rowling describes the Horcrux mocking him with visions of Harry and Hermione together, sneering at his deepest fears. Yet Ron overcomes it, proving his courage not with jokes, but with a decisive, selfless act. The movie, while including this scene, plays it quickly, focusing more on visual spectacle than on the emotional weight of Ron's triumph. What should have been his defining moment is overshadowed. The books remind us again and again that Ron is deeply human. He is not a chosen one, nor the brightest witch of her age, but a boy who feels small and ordinary in a world that worships the extraordinary. His humor is how he survives that ordinariness, how he carves space for himself among giants. Rowling gives him depth by allowing him to fail, to laugh at himself, to hide tears with sarcasm, and to prove loyalty in ways that words cannot capture. In this, he is one of the most authentic characters of the entire series. When the films ignored this, they did not just simplify Ron, they silenced a voice that spoke for all readers who felt overshadowed, insecure, or ordinary. In the novels, Ron's courage grows from those insecurities, and his jokes are his weapons against despair. Stripped of that, the cinematic Ron becomes less a person and more a caricature. His loyalty looks like accident, his humor like foolishness, and his bravery like luck. The audience is left with half a character when the books offered a whole one. Rowling wrote Ron as proof that you do not have to be chosen, brilliant, or flawless to matter. His humor, his flaws, his courage, and his humanity made him essential. To reduce him to a joker is to erase the heart of who he was. The books remember, even if the films forgot. Number 21. Symbol of friendship. Ron Weasley has always been more than the red-haired boy who tags along with Harry Potter and Hermione Granger. In J.K. Rowling's books, Ron is the pulse of the trio, the grounding force that gives their friendship humanity. Where Harry brings destiny and Hermione brings intellect, Ron brings warmth. He is the one who laughs at the absurd, who fills the silences with jokes, and who, in the darkest hours, reminds his friends what they are fighting for. Yet the films often treated him as an accessory, cutting away the very moments that defined him as the true symbol of friendship in the story. Take, for example, Harry's first train ride in Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. In the book, Ron does not simply share a carriage, he opens himself entirely, confessing his insecurities about being the youngest brother after 5 accomplished siblings. Everyone expects me to do as well as the others, but if I do, it's no big deal because they did it first. That honesty, spoken to a boy he had just met, is what established their bond. Harry, who was used to being treated with indifference or hostility, found in Ron a companion who was neither awed by his fame nor cold to his presence. The films reduced this meeting to a light comic exchange over candy, skipping the depth of vulnerability that made Harry choose Ron as his first true friend. This pattern repeats throughout the adaptations. In the books, Ron is the bridge between Harry and Hermione. When Hermione's rigid adherence to rules causes friction, it is Ron's humor that softens her severity. When Harry is crushed under the weight of being the chosen one, it is Ron's loyalty that brings him back to reality. A striking example occurs in The Prisoner of Azkaban, when Harry learns that Sirius Black supposedly betrayed his parents. Hermione tries to reason with logic. Ron responds with loyalty. He tells Harry, "If you want to kill him, we'll help you, but we won't let you do it alone." That line is absent from the film, stripping away Ron's instinctive willingness to stand shoulder to shoulder with Harry, even in matters of life and death. The films often turned Ron into comic relief, as though his main purpose was to provide laughter in the shadows of Harry's destiny and Hermione's brilliance. But in the books, his humor is not a weakness, it is a shield. Ron's jokes are not simply silly one-liners, they are a way to fight despair. When the trio hides in the tent during the Deathly Hallows, the oppressive weight of war surrounds them. Harry obsesses over the Horcruxes, Hermione over research, but Ron is the one who breaks the silence with a quip that reminds them they are still human. He may not have the cleverness to solve every puzzle, but he has the gift of pulling his friends back from despair. By stripping those moments away, the films robbed him of his role as emotional anchor. One of the clearest examples of distortion comes with the chess game in Philosopher's Stone. In the novel, Ron's bravery is monumental. He not only understands the strategy of the enchanted board, but sacrifices himself so Harry and Hermione can advance. He declares, "That's chess. You've got to make some sacrifices," and rides into danger, knowing he will be knocked unconscious. That act is the first great moment of courage in the series. The film portrays the event, but treats it as spectacle, rushing through the sequence without emphasizing Ron's deliberate selflessness. The weight of the decision, the symbolism of a boy choosing to risk himself so his friends might go on, is lost in quick cuts and special effects. The books also show Ron as a character who dares to argue with Harry. Their fights are not signs of weakness, but of equality. In the Goblet of Fire, when Ron feels overshadowed by Harry's fame, he withdraws in jealousy. This conflict is painful, but real. It proves Ron is not a sidekick who accepts everything blindly. He is a friend with his own struggles. When they reconcile, the forgiveness strengthens their bond. "We know you didn't put your name in that goblet," Ron says at last, signaling that loyalty triumphs over doubt. The film treats this subplot lightly, almost brushing it aside, when in truth it revealed Ron as a fully human companion, capable of mistakes, but even more capable of returning to love. Ron's humanity is precisely what made him so vital. Harry and Hermione are extraordinary. Ron is ordinary in the best sense. He comes from a crowded house where hand-me-downs are the norm, where money is scarce, but where love is abundant. His imperfections, fear of spiders, moments of jealousy, insecurities about his worth, mirror the flaws of every reader. When Harry looks at Ron, he sees a friend who does not demand perfection, who does not expect him to be the boy who lived, but who treats him as just Harry. That dynamic kept Harry tethered to the world of normal boys, even as destiny pushed him into legend. A revealing moment arrives in the Chamber of Secrets, when Harry fears he might be connected to Slytherin's monster. Hermione searches for explanations, but Ron gives the simplest and most profound reassurance. "You're a little scary sometimes, you know that? Brilliant, but scary." In his clumsy honesty, Ron offers comfort without pretension. The films favor Hermione's deductions, rarely letting Ron's words shine with the same weight. In doing so, they diminished the small but powerful ways Ron reaffirmed Harry's humanity. Even in darker times, Ron's courage often came quietly. In The Prisoner of Azkaban, when confronted by Sirius in the Shrieking Shack, Ron, lying injured with a broken leg, still drags himself in front of Harry and says, "If you want to kill Harry, you'll have to kill us too." That is friendship distilled to its purest form. To stand guard not with wands blazing, but with a broken body refusing to yield. The films omit this detail, making Ron's bravery less visible, when in truth it is one of his defining moments. In the Deathly Hallows, Ron's temporary departure from the tent has often been criticized, but even this moment demonstrates the depth of his role. His leaving shows that friendship is not about perfect loyalty, but about return. When he comes back, destroying the Horcrux with the sword of Gryffindor, the confrontation with his deepest fears reveals why he matters. The Horcrux mocks him with visions of Harry and Hermione together, feeding on his insecurities. Ron defeats not just a fragment of Voldemort, but his own self-doubt. That triumph is monumental, yet the film frames it as a short, almost secondary moment, failing to highlight the symbolism of a boy conquering his fears for the sake of his friends. Ron's humour, often dismissed as silliness in the films, carries enormous weight in the books. Consider his line in The Half-Blood Prince when discussing the dangers of apparition. It's the only way to get the stomach-turning sensation of being sucked through a rubber tube. His friends laugh, even in tense times. After, in war, is survival. Without Ron, the trio would have drowned in the gravity of their mission. The films reduced these moments to brief comic beats, erasing the deeper truth that humour is a form of resilience. The erasure of Ron's role is especially painful when one considers the symbolism of his character. Harry is marked by prophecy, Hermione by intellect, but Ron represents the power of ordinary love. He is proof that friendship, though not chosen by destiny, is as powerful as any spell. Rowling wrote him as the boy who eats too much, who blushes when teased, who stumbles with words, yet who, when the time comes, will throw himself in front of death for his friends. The films too often made him the punchline, forgetting that he was the soul of the trio. Even the romantic subplot with Hermione suffered in adaptation. In the books, their gradual bond grows from quarrels, misunderstandings, and mutual respect. Ron's jealousy over Victor Crumb, his fumbling attempts to impress, his eventual realization of Hermione's worth, these are all deeply human beats. In the films, the relationship often feels tacked on, as though the story suddenly decided to pair them. By stripping Ron of depth, the films weakened not only his character, but also one of the central emotional arcs of the series. Ultimately, Ron's absence in cinematic depth matters because friendship is at the heart of Harry Potter. Rowling once said that the series is about death, but it is equally about the ties that make life bearable. Harry could not have faced Voldemort alone. Hermione could not have solved every puzzle without support. Ron, with his laughter, loyalty, and imperfections, carried the invisible weight of keeping them human. To minimize him is to misunderstand the heartbeat of the story. Ron Weasley was never a sidekick. He was never just the boy with the jokes or the nervous laugh. He was the thread that held the tapestry together, the reminder that even in a world of magic, the most extraordinary power is the ordinary act of standing by your friends. The books gave him that dignity. The films, sadly, too often turned him into a shadow. Yet for readers, the Ron of the page remains flawed, loyal, funny, and brave, the true symbol of friendship in a story about love's triumph over fear. Number 22, a true Quidditch player. Ron Weasley's relationship with Quidditch in J.K. Rowling's books is far more layered and meaningful than what the films allow us to see. In the novels, his journey as Gryffindor's keeper is not just a comic side plot, but a symbol of his personal growth, his ability to rise above insecurity, and his chance to step out of the shadows of both Harry and Hermione. Yet on screen, Ron's victories are reduced to moments of slapstick humor, overshadowing the intensity and significance that Rowling carefully built. By stripping away the depth of Ron's development in Quidditch, the films unintentionally distorted one of his most defining arcs. When Ron is first introduced as Keeper in Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, the book devotes rich attention to his anxieties and his constant comparisons to his older brothers. Fred and George were legendary beaters and Charlie had been a star seeker, so Ron feels immense pressure to prove himself. Rowling describes his nerves vividly. Ron had a look of utmost terror at the thought of being Keeper. His ears had gone red, and he fumbled with his broomstick. These are not the traits of a hopeless player, but of a young man battling stage fright in front of his peers. His journey was never about raw talent alone, but about whether he could silence the voices of self-doubt. One of the strongest aspects of Ron's arc is the way Rowling ties his Quidditch struggles to his character insecurities. He has always felt like the sixth son, overshadowed by Bill's brilliance, Charlie's athleticism, Percy's academic prestige, and the twins' charm. On the Quidditch pitch, those fears play out in public. In Order of the Phoenix, he is mocked by the Slytherins with a cruel song. Weasley is our king, he always lets the quaffle in. Instead of using this taunt as simple comic relief, the novel transforms it into a motivator for Ron. His arc builds toward the reversal of that chant, as Gryffindor eventually twists it into a song of triumph when Ron proves his worth. The films, however, turn this struggle into an ongoing joke. In Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, Ron is shown bumbling on his broom, barely managing to block shots, and his victory is played for laughs when he appears to succeed only under the influence of a supposed lucky potion, Felix Felicis. The movie never gives weight to the fact that his performance was real, not just luck or comedy. In the book, Harry tricks Ron into believing he drank Felix, but the reality is that Ron performs brilliantly on his own. Rowling emphasizes this with the line, "He was the hero of the match. His saves were so spectacular that they won the game." That distinction matters because it shows Ron overcoming his own mind rather than leaning on external aid. The turning point in Ron's Quidditch story is his performance in Half-Blood Prince during the match against Slytherin. Rowling describes his saves in cinematic detail. Ron's nerves seemed to vanish as he dived, blocked and deflected every quaffle with a newfound confidence. This was the culmination of years of self-doubt. He had been mocked, doubted and even ridiculed by his own teammates at times, but here he stepped into the role of true keeper. The Slytherins, who had tormented him with the "Weasley is our king" chant, were silenced by his skill. The pride of his friends and teammates was palpable, with Hermione rushing to embrace him and Gryffindor House celebrating as though he alone had delivered victory. The film barely scratches the surface of this transformation. Instead, it presents Ron's triumph as a moment of comic surprise, undermining the arc Rowling carefully designed. By doing so, it robs the audience of the emotional weight behind his victory. The truth is that this was not just about a Quidditch game, it was about Ron finally proving to himself that he was more than the insecure shadow of his brothers, more than Harry's sidekick, and more than the butt of jokes. He was, in that moment, a hero in his own right. The problem with the film adaptation lies in tone. In the books, Quidditch is described with urgency and intensity, each save and score vividly narrated. Rowling writes the matches like battles where courage, strategy and heart define the outcome. Ron's role in those battles is essential because as keeper, he is the last line of defense. When he rises to the occasion, the stakes feel real, and the reader senses the weight of his achievement. In contrast, the films stage Quidditch as a spectacle of special effects, where the tension is secondary to humor. By turning Ron's insecurities into slapstick, the adaptations deny him the gravitas his arc deserves. What makes Ron's victory in Half-Blood Prince so compelling is the psychological warfare behind it. The book shows how much his confidence hinges on the idea of luck, on whether he believes he has the Felix potion or not. Harry manipulates this belief, knowing Ron's self-doubt is his greatest enemy. But Rowling reveals that once Ron believes in himself, he does not need magical aid. The line, "He was not playing like a man under the influence of luck, he was playing like a man who finally trusted his own ability," illustrates the message. The potion was never the key. Ron's own courage was. This nuance is completely lost in the film, which frames his performance as comic irony instead of a psychological victory. Even more significant is how the books connect Ron's Quidditch success to the themes of loyalty and friendship. Gryffindor's win in Half-Blood Prince is not just Ron's triumph, but a moment where the house rallies behind him. After years of feeling excluded, Ron becomes the center of admiration. The Gryffindor common room bursts into song. "Weasley is our king. He didn't let the quaffle in." This reversal of the cruel chant is symbolic. Ron takes the very weapon used to humiliate him and transforms it into a source of pride. The films skip over this poetic justice, erasing the significance of that moment for his character's dignity. It is telling that Rowling places Ron's great Quidditch victory in the same book where he matures in other ways. In Half-Blood Prince, Ron navigates jealousy, romance, and his own place within the trio. His triumph on the pitch mirrors his internal struggle. He is no longer the insecure boy defined by what he lacks, but a young man who discovers what he can achieve. Rowling deliberately ties his athletic accomplishment to his emotional growth. By contrast, the films leave Ron in a state of perpetual comic relief, denying the audience the opportunity to celebrate his development. Critics often dismiss Ron as the comic third wheel beside Harry's heroism and Hermione's brilliance, but Quidditch was the arena where he was meant to shine independently. Rowling never intended him to be a flawless player, but she gave him moments of true greatness. These moments mattered not just to his character, but to the morale of Gryffindor. When he guarded the goalposts with newfound confidence, he embodied the qualities of his house: bravery, resilience, and loyalty. His teammates relied on him, and he delivered. The films flatten this into background noise, leaving viewers with the impression that Ron was lucky rather than capable. Another overlooked detail in the adaptation is the way Rowling frames the crowd's reaction to Ron. In the novel, Harry notices that even the Slytherins are stunned by his saves, their jeers dying out as Ron defends goal after goal. The silence of his rivals is as powerful as the cheers of his friends. The victory is described as a transformation, not just of the score but of Ron's reputation. That narrative arc shows that confidence can silence doubt and that perseverance can overturn ridicule. Yet the films never allow the audience to feel this shift. Instead, they cut quickly to comedic scenes that downplay the gravitas of the match. The contrast between book and film raises a larger question about adaptation. When humor replaces depth, characters lose the layers that made them resonate with readers. Ron's Quidditch victories are not trivial. They symbolize a universal struggle with self-doubt and the need for validation. Every reader who has ever felt underestimated can identify with Ron's journey from nervous beginner to triumphant hero. By failing to honor that arc, the films diminished one of the most human and relatable aspects of his character. In truth, Ron Weasley was never the clumsy background figure that the films suggest. He was the boy who stood on a broomstick, trembling, yet still flew into the storm of jeers and expectations. He was the keeper who turned humiliation into glory, who blocked the quaffles not through luck, but through determination. His victory in Half-Blood Prince was more than a game. It was the moment Ron finally proved that he was worthy, not just of his team, not just of Gryffindor, but of himself. And that is the Ron Weasley that readers will always remember, even if the films chose to laugh instead of cheer. Number 23, a man who can laugh at himself. Ron Weasley was never meant to be the tragic companion living in the shadow of the chosen one, yet this is how the films often portray him. In J.K. Rowling's books, he is more than comic relief or a boy crushed by his own insecurities. He is the friend who understands his flaws and finds a way to laugh at them, turning his imperfections into resilience. This self-irony is not just a personality quirk, it is his shield, his way of navigating a world that constantly reminds him of what he lacks. On the page, Ron is charming precisely because he does not pretend to be perfect. He acknowledges that he is the sixth son in a poor wizarding family, that his wand is chipped, that he wears hand-me-down robes, but he refuses to drown in self-pity. Instead, he cracks a joke, and in those moments, readers fall in love with his honesty. A powerful example comes early in Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, when Ron first meets Harry on the train to Hogwarts. He explains his background with a mix of embarrassment and humour. "You never get anything new when you're one of 7. I got Bill's old robes, Charlie's old wand, and Percy's old rat." The sentence, spoken with wry amusement, shows that he understands the unfairness of his situation, but refuses to let it define him in bitterness. The films, however, translate this into awkward self-pity. Rupert Grint's delivery in the adaptation leans towards shame and resignation, cutting out the cheeky humour that Rowling wrote into Ron's voice. This subtle difference matters because it shapes how the audience sees him, not as the brave boy with a laugh on his lips, but as the insecure friend always left behind. The self-irony continues throughout the series in the novels. Ron repeatedly mocks his own shortcomings before others can. When facing a boggart in Prisoner of Azkaban, his greatest fear appears, a giant spider. After the class, he shrugs off the embarrassment with humour, telling Harry and Hermione that the spider should at least have removed its legs. It is a classic Ron moment, self-deprecating, absurd, and funny. This is the boy who can stare his greatest fear in the face and still make a joke. The films, in contrast, exaggerate the fear itself. The scene becomes slapstick, with Ron squealing and stumbling, which reduces him to a caricature. What disappears is the wit that allows Book Ron to transform humiliation into comedy. Nowhere is this loss clearer than in his relationship with Hermione. In the books, Ron is acutely aware that she is more intelligent, and he embraces this difference with humour. During their countless study sessions, when Hermione overwhelms them with knowledge, Ron mutters sarcastic comments about needing her brain transplanted. He laughs at his own lack of academic brilliance, and readers laugh with him. In Goblet of Fire, when Hermione gives a lecture about house elves and SPEW, Ron retorts, "Hermione, open your eyes, they like it!" He does not mean it cruelly, but with a grin that undercuts his own laziness and reluctance to care about elf rights. The movies flatten this dynamic, portraying him instead as sulky and insensitive. The light-hearted teasing and the ability to laugh at his own lack of Hermione's intellect are gone, replaced by tension and bickering that make him appear small. The heart of Ron's self-irony lies in his role as Harry's companion. He knows he will never be the boy who lived. He jokes about it often, but never with resentment. In Chamber of Secrets, after Harry survives yet another near-death experience, Ron says with a grin, "Why spiders? Why couldn't it be follow the butterflies?" His words acknowledge his fear, but turn it into humour, easing the darkness of the scene. That line survived in the film, but the tone shifted, delivered as a gag for the audience instead of a genuine moment of Ron turning weakness into laughter. In the books, it is not just about the joke. It is about survival, about a boy who refuses to let the weight of living next to a hero crush him. Rowling uses Ron's humour as a balancing force in the trio. Where Harry often broods and Hermione insists on seriousness, Ron punctures the intensity with self-mockery. In Order of the Phoenix, after being named prefect, Ron blurts out to Harry, "Prefect? Me! It's only because I'm the youngest of the boys, you know. Fred and George must have been a bit disappointed." His words show a deep understanding of his place in the family hierarchy, but he turns it into a laugh, not a lament. The films omit this nuance, instead framing him as shocked and somewhat unworthy, his discomfort emphasized more than his humor. What disappears is the boy who recognizes his own ordinariness and uses laughter to elevate it into something extraordinary. Even in moments of failure, Ron's humor defines him. When he is poisoned by the mead in Half-Blood Prince, he wakes up muttering Hermione's name, and afterward he turns his own near-death into a source of jokes. He laughs at the idea that Harry witnessed his most vulnerable moment. That ability to mock himself even after trauma is what makes Ron resilient. The movie version softens the moment into awkward comedy, focusing on romantic embarrassment rather than the bravery of a boy who refuses to wallow in fear. Book Ron's humor never trivializes danger, it humanizes it. Perhaps the clearest distinction is in the handling of Ron's jealousy in Goblet of Fire. In the books, when Ron and Harry fight after Harry's name is chosen for the Triwizard Tournament, Ron eventually admits his feelings with a kind of sheepish humor. He tells Harry, "You get everything, don't you?" But later admits that he should have known Harry wouldn't put his name in. It is an emotional moment softened by Ron's ability to laugh at his own foolishness once the truth is clear. The film adaptation strips away the humor, making Ron appear sulky and bitter for a long stretch. Instead of a boy who laughs at his own mistakes, we see a caricature of envy that damages the audience's perception of him. The contrast between the mediums raises a question. Why does self-irony matter so much? Because it is the core of Ron's strength. He is not the best at spells, not the smartest strategist, not the bravest warrior, but he has something essential, the ability to recognize his flaws without being destroyed by them. That gift allows him to stand by Harry in battles, to remain loyal when others falter, and to keep Hermione grounded. Laughter becomes a survival tactic, a way to push through fear, jealousy, and poverty without collapsing. The films, by stripping away that humor, unintentionally turn him into a weaker figure, defined by insecurity rather than resilience. One of the most overlooked passages in the books appears in Deathly Hallows. When Ron destroys Slytherin's locket, the Horcrux taunts him with visions of Harry and Hermione together, mocking his deepest insecurities. Ron's triumph comes not just from destroying the locket, but from laughing afterward at the ridiculousness of his own fears. He shrugs off the dark magic with humor, proving that even the cruelest illusions cannot shatter him. In the film, the scene turns into heavy melodrama, with Ron nearly broken by the vision. His victory appears grim, not triumphant, because his humor is absent. The Ron of the novels is the boy who falls off his broom, breaks his wand, and still makes the entire common room laugh with a joke about his own clumsiness. He is the boy who can not dance but mocks himself in Goblet of Fire until others laugh too, diffusing his humiliation. He is the boy who, when facing near death in the Forbidden Forest, still mutters a joke about Harry's luck. This Ron is not pitiable. He is human, real, and relatable. His self-irony is the bridge between fear and courage, between inadequacy and loyalty. By erasing this trait, the films deny audiences one of the richest portraits in the series. Even Rowling herself underlined Ron's humor as central to his character. In interviews, she said that Ron brought the heart to the trio, not because he was flawless, but because he could laugh when everything else seemed unbearable. That laughter, often directed at himself, made him more than a sidekick. It made him the kind of friend who stands between despair and hope. Without it, the films reduce him to comic relief or jealous distraction, robbing him of the dignity that readers know belongs to him. When readers return to the books, they rediscover a Ron who is more than a secondary character. They see the boy who can laugh at the patched elbows on his robes, who can grin at the sight of spiders despite trembling, who can poke fun at his own lack of intelligence without bitterness. This is the Ron who remains memorable decades later, not because he is perfect, but because he teaches the quiet art of laughing at oneself. That art is resilience, and it is a quality the films missed, but the books captured with honesty. Number 24, A Shoulder for Harry. Of all the relationships woven through J.K. Rowling's books, the bond between Harry Potter and Ron Weasley carries a raw, human weight that the films never quite managed to capture. In the novels, Ron stands not as the comic sidekick or the bumbling companion, but as the unshakable shoulder on which Harry can lean. He is the friend who does not always have the right words, who sometimes blurts out things that sting, and who can be jealous or insecure, but who, despite everything, shows up, sits beside Harry in silence, and makes the unbearable feel less crushing. This version of Ron, layered and flawed yet profoundly loyal, is what the reader holds close. But when the story transitioned to the screen, this essential role was diluted, reshaped, and often passed into the hands of Hermione Granger, leaving audiences with a different impression of who truly carried Harry through his darkest hours. In the first book, Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, Ron becomes the very first person to treat Harry as just another boy, not as the boy who lived. Their first train ride together sets the tone of their friendship, filled with simple moments like sharing food and laughter. Harry, who has spent his life being treated as a burden by the Dursleys, suddenly feels like he belongs. That moment when Ron offers him half of his corned beef sandwich and later shares a chocolate frog seems almost ordinary, yet it resonates with extraordinary warmth. Rowling's text paints Ron not as a background figure, but as the one who instinctively understands what Harry needs most, companionship without conditions. The films reduce this subtlety, using Ron as comic relief, often flattening the tenderness of his gestures into punchlines that serve the scene's pacing rather than its emotional truth. A striking example of Ron's quiet support comes in Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix. After the trauma of Cedric Diggory's death and the return of Voldemort, Harry is consumed by anger and isolation. The Ministry brands him a liar, students whisper behind his back, and even Dumbledore distances himself. In one particularly heavy moment, Harry snaps at Ron and Hermione in frustration. While Hermione counters with logical arguments, Ron simply present, offering no grand wisdom but showing that he refuses to leave. Rowling writes, "Whatever you've got to say to us, we're with you." It is this line that defines Ron. His presence is not about intellect or strategy, it is about loyalty so steadfast that even in silence it speaks volumes. In the films, however, this moment is softened, the focus diverted to Hermione's rational explanations and Harry's own anger, leaving Ron's role nearly invisible. Another moment comes in Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, when Harry faces the first task of the Triwizard Tournament. The days before the challenge are filled with dread, and Harry feels the crushing weight of expectation. Ron, who has been distant after his own jealousy boiled over, reconciles with Harry in a way that reminds the reader of his role as Harry's anchor. Rowling writes, "They looked at each other, and there was the old understanding between them, and Ron grinned at Harry, who grinned back." No words of brilliance, no dramatic speeches, just a grin that said everything Harry needed to hear. This is the magic of Ron's character. His emotional intelligence lies not in solving problems, but in shouldering the silence so Harry does not have to carry it alone. Yet in the film adaptation, Hermione is the one who stands closest, guiding Harry with her advice and encouragement, subtly shifting the audience's perception of who was Harry's primary support system. The emotional significance of Ron's presence comes into sharp relief in Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows. When Harry visits his parents' graves in Godric's Hollow, grief overwhelms him. Ron does not attempt to reason with him or offer hollow comfort. He simply stands beside Harry in the snow, silent, a companion in sorrow. That wordless moment is devastating in its intimacy. It shows that Ron understands Harry's pain cannot be mended by words but only shared in its heaviness. Hermione's compassion is boundless, but in the novels she often responds through action or reasoning. Ron, however, embodies the unspoken truth that sometimes the only thing one can do for a grieving friend is to stand beside him and not leave. The films, unfortunately, compress or alter these kinds of moments, robbing the audience of Ron's essential contribution to Harry's resilience. One of the clearest cases of distortion occurs in Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince. In the book, when Harry is racked with guilt over Dumbledore's death, it is Ron who sits with him, a quiet anchor against the storm. Rowling notes Ron's awkward but genuine attempts at comfort, offering Harry a sense of shared grief that needs no explanation. But in the film, this delicate role is largely transferred to Hermione, who consoles Harry with words and gestures of understanding. The effect is subtle but consequential. The audience walks away believing Hermione is Harry's emotional core, while Ron becomes sidelined as comedic distraction or romantic subplot. This shift erodes the very heart of Harry and Ron's brotherhood, replacing it with a version of the trio in which Ron feels less vital. It is also worth noting that Ron's insecurities and imperfections are part of what make him the perfect shoulder. He does not exist above Harry's pain, nor does he claim to have answers. He stumbles, gets jealous, and even leaves during the Horcrux hunt, yet always returns because his love for Harry runs deeper than his doubts. This fallibility gives his support authenticity. When he says, "We're with you whatever happens," it carries the weight of someone who has considered leaving and still chooses to stay. The films gloss over this complexity, often playing his weaknesses for laughs rather than treating them as facets of a loyal but human friend. As a result, the audience is deprived of the emotional richness that makes Ron's companionship indispensable. In Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, when Harry hears the disembodied voice in the walls, it is Ron who doesn't question his sanity. While others might dismiss Harry's experiences as impossible, Ron simply believes him. That trust is not born of logic, as Hermione's would be, but of loyalty. He does not need to understand. He only needs to stand beside his friend. In the film, this quiet moment of faith is minimized, and the audience sees Ron primarily through the lens of his fears, his arachnophobia, played for humor in the Forbidden Forest. This undercuts his depth, reshaping him into comic relief rather than the boy who silently validates Harry's reality. One cannot ignore the chess game at the climax of the first book, where Ron sacrifices himself so Harry can move forward to face Voldemort. That act is not simply bravery, it is the physical manifestation of his role as Harry's shoulder, his willingness to absorb the blow so Harry can continue. Rowling makes it clear that Ron sees himself as part of a greater whole, not the hero, but the one who ensures the hero can do what must be done. In the film, the scene is included but loses much of its gravity. Ron's sacrifice feels less central, overshadowed by the visual spectacle, and the weight of what it says about his friendship with Harry is diminished. The subtle moments, the silences, the simple acts of being there, These are the threads that bind Harry and Ron in the books. When Harry feels the crushing burden of being chosen, Ron does not remind him of prophecies or strategies. He is the one who shares the burden by existing in it with him. "We'll be there, Harry," he says more than once, and it becomes a refrain of loyalty. The films, eager to highlight Hermione's brilliance and emotional depth, often rewrite these exchanges, giving her the role of comforter while Ron is left to stumble in the background. This narrative decision alters the dynamics of the trio in the eyes of audiences who never read the books, leading them to underestimate the foundation Ron provides. The result of this cinematic reshaping is that generations of viewers grew up believing Ron was nothing more than comic relief, and Hermione the true emotional partner to Harry. While Hermione's importance is undeniable, the books show a more balanced trio where each provides what the others cannot. Hermione brings intellect and reason, Harry brings courage and heart, but Ron brings the grounding presence of loyalty, the shoulder to lean on when the weight becomes unbearable. The films distort this balance, and in doing so, they obscure one of the most touching friendships in the series. The image of Ron Weasley in the books is not glamorous or heroic in the traditional sense. He is awkward, flawed, and often overshadowed by others, but his quiet acts of loyalty hold more weight than his missteps. He is the boy who never lets Harry sit in his pain alone, who grins when words will not do, and who believes when logic cannot explain. By stripping him of this emotional role, the films flattened him into a caricature, depriving audiences of the deeper story about how true friendship often exists, not in speeches or brilliance, but in the silent act of being there. Ron was Harry's shoulder, and in that role, he was irreplaceable. Number 25. Courage in small things. In the world of adaptations, small choices echo louder than they seem, and nowhere is this more evident than in the shaping of Ron Weasley's character. Readers of J.K. Rowling's books know him as a boy who carries courage not only in grand duels, but in the ordinary, messy moments of daily life. The films, in their drive for cinematic focus on Harry, often stripped Ron of these smaller acts, leaving audiences with a version who quivers at spiders, blunders his way through friendships, and occasionally contributes in climactic battles. But the real Ron is braver than that. His bravery does not scream through lightning bolts and saving spells. It breathes in quiet defiance, in sarcastic jabs at authority, and in standing his ground when humiliation is the most likely outcome. The boy who stands next to Harry in the books is not a sidekick of trembling knees, but a companion whose courage is made visible in the unglamorous corners of everyday Hogwarts life. When we return to the first book, Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, the seeds of Ron's courage are planted early. After Malfoy insults Hermione, sneering at her intelligence and blood status, it is Ron who instinctively leaps to her defense. He does not weigh the odds, nor does he calculate his chances against the richer, more socially powerful Malfoy. He simply reacts, propelled by an inner conviction that cruelty must be met head-on. Later in the same book, his bravery blooms in the chess match beneath Hogwarts, where he willingly sacrifices himself so Harry can move forward. The films remember this one moment, but forget all the smaller, less cinematic times when Ron, often alone, stood against injustice. This imbalance is crucial. A single grand sacrifice impresses, but the string of minor rebellions defines who a character truly is. Consider his confrontations with Professor Snape. While Harry often keeps his silence under Snape's sharp tongue, it is Ron who mutters insults under his breath, sometimes loud enough to be heard. In Prisoner of Azkaban, Snape belittles Hermione by mocking her eagerness to answer questions. Ron's voice cuts the tension. You asked us a question and she knows the answer. Why ask if you don't want to be told? It is a moment of raw defiance, the type the films skip in favour of Harry's more obvious clashes. Yet this moment matters. Standing up to a teacher known for cruelty is not glorious. It does not win applause, but it shows a nerve of steel. Ron risks humiliation and punishment simply to defend his friend, and this is where his courage shines brighter than spells on a battlefield. The same bravery pulses through his constant skirmishes with Malfoy. Unlike Harry, who is Malfoy's primary rival, or Hermione, who represents everything Malfoy despises, Ron fights for dignity on another level. He fights as the poor boy mocked for his second-hand robes and his family's lack of wealth. Malfoy's insults about the Weasleys cut deeper than any spell, but Ron never lets them pass unanswered. In Chamber of Secrets, when Malfoy snarls, "No one asked your opinion, you filthy little mudblood," it is Ron who draws his wand in fury, ready to curse Malfoy despite not yet mastering magic. The wand backfires and he spends the day vomiting slugs, but that humiliation underscores the essence of his courage. He acts even when success is unlikely, showing that true bravery is not about guaranteed victory, but about refusing silence in the face of cruelty. His small acts of valor extend to the very fabric of everyday friendship. When Harry is doubted by the school, when whispers about the Chamber of Secrets spread, Ron never wavers. His loyalty is its own kind of courage, because standing beside the outcast always demands it. In Goblet of Fire, his moment of weakness and jealousy when Harry's name emerges from the goblet is often cited as proof of cowardice, but it is fleeting compared to the loyalty he shows afterward. Once reconciled, Ron charges into supporting Harry in tasks that terrify him, like standing near the dragons or helping decipher underwater clues. This willingness to put himself in frightening circumstances for the sake of his friend is not the courage of spotlight moments, but the courage of someone who chooses loyalty even when fear scratches at the edges of his resolve. One of the most overlooked displays of Ron's bravery comes in Order of the Phoenix. During the chaos at the Ministry of Magic, the focus of films rests squarely on Harry, with Ron portrayed as little more than comic relief. Yet in the book, Ron fights valiantly in the Department of Mysteries, dueling Death Eaters alongside his friends. He is cursed and injured, but he continues to fight until physically incapable. Rowling never writes him as a background fighter. She writes him as a boy who stands in a room of masked adults and refuses to collapse into fear. In truth, the Ministry battle highlights that Ron, often overshadowed in cinematic storytelling, is willing to stake his life in combat, even without the glamour of being the chosen one. Even within Hogwarts, where fear is subtler, Ron's defiance of authority illustrates his bravery. In Order of the Phoenix, when Dolores Umbridge takes control, Ron becomes part of Dumbledore's army, not just because Harry leads it, but because he understands the need for resistance. He practices spells, stands in a room filled with students who fear exposure, and commits himself to rebellion. Courage here is not loud or cinematic. It is the courage of routine, showing up to practice, risking punishment, believing in a cause greater than himself. The films distill this into a montage, stripping away the gritty persistence that defines Ron's bravery. The books also show Ron's courage as humour, an often overlooked shield. His jokes, sometimes ill-timed, are not mere comic relief, but acts of defiance against despair. In Deathly Hallows, when the trio faces starvation and uncertainty while camping, Ron breaks the tension with humour. It is easy to dismiss these lines as jokes, but humour in darkness is a form of bravery too. It keeps fear at bay, offers his friends a moment to breathe, and reminds them that life, however bleak, still carries sparks of warmth. Stripped from the films, his humor often reduces to buffoonery, ignoring the bravery behind laughter. In times of terror, Ron's courage is also tested by his insecurities. He does not march forward with the confidence of Harry or Hermione, but this makes his bravery weightier. In Half-Blood Prince, when Ron plays as keeper for the Gryffindor Quidditch team, he trembles with self-doubt. Yet, he still climbs onto his broom, still faces the jeers of Slytherins, still allows himself to risk humiliation in front of the entire school. When he saves the match, the victory is not just about Quidditch. It is about conquering his fear. True courage is not born from the absence of fear, but from action despite it, and Ron epitomizes this in ways the films flatten into background noise.